there, and welcome to Personalization Point Episode 7, the 7 most common myths of personalization. My name is Becc Holland. I'm the CEO and founder of Flip the Script. Before we jump in, if you do me a favor, go ahead and go to flipthescript.co so you make sure to download the deck for this session. It's pretty meaty, so I want to make sure that you have it right in front of you. Once you've done that, let's go ahead and jump into the content. The first most common myth about personalization is, drum roll, that you just can't scale it when it's already been scaled. So let's take a look at what scale is first. So whenever I hear, can you scale it? It's usually coming from the relevance only camp. So if we think about relevance only, that's when no one is thinking about the scale conversation. So we should defer to the average activity metric within the industry. So the average activity metric is going to be, Bridge Group reported that it's going to be in 2018, that it's going to be 45 dials per day. And Topo Research found that it is 35 dials per day. So let's take that, let's take even the highest case scenario, that scale should be defined as what people are doing when they're going relevance only. So the myth would be that you can't scale personalized messaging within dials whenever, if 45 is our bar, then we walked through earlier in the math of personalization that we are getting to, at minimum, even with personalized messaging, 60 dials per day. So not only did we match scale, we scaled further beyond what your average rep is doing when it's a relevant approach only. The second most common myth is that it takes too much time. Personalization just takes too much time. I'm researching, I'm spending tons of time, looking at someone's LinkedIn profile, etc. If you go into the math of personalization session, I go a little bit deeper. But in terms of how much time it takes to personalize, if we are doing 30 emails per day, 3 out of the 5 emails that I'm doing in every sequence are what I would consider quote unquote high personalization. They take no longer than 8 minutes, which means every day, 144 minutes, it would take me to do all of the high personalization emails for the day. 12 emails, because 2 out of the 5 emails in the sequence are light personalization, which would be 40%, which is 12 times 5 minutes on average that it would take me to write that level of email. And these are upper limits, keep in mind. So for high personalization emails, I'm usually landing around 3 to 4 minutes max. And for light personalization, I'm usually landing around 30 seconds, 45 seconds, because I'm just double checking dynamic tags. But I wanted to make sure that we were safe here. So for the high personalization emails, 18 times 8 minutes give us 144 minutes. For the light personalization emails, 12 of those emails would be light personalization times 5 minutes, which would give me 60 minutes. Out of the calls, it takes the exact same amount of time to make a personalized dial as it does to make an unpersonalized dial with just relevance only. It's the exact same amount of time. The only thing that would change would be the research on the front end, which we account for. So exact same amount of time. I'll even triple, quadruple, whatever, how long it takes to make a dial. And I'll give you 2 minutes, that it takes 2 minutes to actually just hit dial on the phone. So if I'm doing 60 calls per day, which again, this was the minimum for my reps whenever we were doing a personalization strategy, 2 minutes apiece, 120 minutes per day would be spent towards cold calls, which again, via Topo Research said 35 dials per day. Bridge Group said 45 dials per day back in 2018. So I'm taking the upper limit, and at minimum, I'm adding 15 dials on top of it, what the average rep is doing with personalization, which would give me 120 minutes per day allotted to that. If I need 90 separate activities per day, because it was 30 emails and 60 cold calls, I would have 90 activities per day. Every single sequence has 15 activity steps, which means I would need to add 6 net new prospects to fuel that outreach. So it should take 5 minutes, no longer than 5 minutes, to hunt each prospect 3 personalized premises, and you can save with an outreach, no longer than 5 minutes. If you go to season 1, episode 19, I go in how to not over research, and I show you how it can be done. It takes me 5 minutes on the high end, but again, it usually is taking me 3 minutes, but I allotted for 5 minutes on the high end and said 6 prospects, net new prospects that I need to add to get the numbers that I need, times 5 minutes gives me 30 minutes per day on the back end. And so for the highly personalized emails, it took me 144 minutes. For the low personalized emails, it took me 60 minutes per day. For the calls, it took me 120 minutes per day. It took me 30 minutes for research. So net, it would take me 354 minutes per day to do a personalization strategy. And keep in mind, an 8-hour workday is 480 minutes, meaning I have over 2 hours to go to the bathroom, go to lunch, walk around, get on Slack, get on LinkedIn, and read all these posts. I have over 2 hours to do that in an 8-hour day, which typically we're working more than that, to effectively release a personalization strategy. Keep in mind that the dials are higher than the average activity metric. But I didn't want to stop there. I'm going to say, okay, I needed to add 6 prospects, but let's just triple it just for fun. Let's just say that I need to add 18 people per day. So I need to research 18 net new prospects every single day to fuel this outreach. 5 minutes for the research, which gives me 90 minutes per day. So from the top, 18 emails that are high personalization will take me 144 minutes. The light personalization emails would take me 60 minutes because it's 12 times 5. 60 calls that'll give you 2 minutes just to hit the dial button gives me an hour and 120 minutes, which is roughly 2 hours. And then I'm going to take the 3x of what I need just for the math's sake, and it's going to take me 90 minutes to do research, which is still bada bing, bada boom, 414 minutes. Your average minutes within a day for an 8-hour day only, it's going to be 480 minutes. So you have a delta of roughly 66 minutes over an hour that you could walk around. Keep in mind your lunch shouldn't even be included because it's 8 hours. You go 8 to 12, have a 1-hour lunch, and go 1 to 5. That is an 8-hour workday. So you already took an hour for lunch. You have an extra 66 minutes, even if I 3x the people that I need, even if I rank higher on the 8 minutes that it takes me to personalize when it only takes me 3, even if I put in that it takes me 5 minutes when it normally takes me 30 to 45 seconds, and even if I give every single dial 2 minutes to just hit the click within the sales engagement platform, I have a 66-minute delta after lunch for an 8-hour workday. Myth number 3 that we need to light up like a Christmas tree, that you should only do personalization for tier 1 or enterprise accounts. Before we go into this, point number 1 on this would be, it's not like I work at an SMB company and hate you knowing who I am when I'm being prospected into, and then transfer into Intel that is enterprise, and all of a sudden I hate personalization. I hated personalization in one case and then started to love it at Intel. That shift doesn't happen. At the most case scenario that I'm going to buy is that certain buyer personas like a personalization versus another, or that certain industry verticals would like personalization over another, but certainly not within that industry vertical and within that buyer persona that a smaller company versus a larger company would have preference for you knowing who they were. I would actually buy that an enterprise company, they get focused on all the time because they're LinkedIn, versus an SMB company, I never get outreach that's personalized. So usually, in my experience, the person who isn't focused on that much will respond the most positively to it. So this theory goes that you should only, for tier 1 or really, really important accounts, that's the time when I want to personalize, and I could not disagree more. You need to set the bar for the size of company that you want to sell into, and then everyone over that bar that you're going to focus on them. If you're going to focus on them well. Book more meetings, regardless of whether that's SMB or enterprise. So if I have a higher quota for SMB than enterprise, irregardless, personalization and relevance works more effectively than just relevance. So why on earth, especially if I can over the activity metric that normal relevance reps are doing, why on earth would I cut that math down to say like, hey, instead of doing something that's more effective and that I can get more volume out than just relevance, I want to just do relevance only because I think that that's the keys to the kingdom. So tier 1 or enterprise, I get it. They're very, very important accounts. I would say that you need to decide whether you want to prospect into someone or not. And for the people that you do, you need to go ahead and you need to personalize to them because it's more effective whether your meeting quota is 15 or whether it's 25 or whether it's an SMB company with only 85 people, or whether that's an 8,000 person company, both meetings are important to you. You're trying to set both meetings, and it's more effective to do personalization and relevance. So why on earth would you not do a personalization strategy, especially if you can push higher than the average activity metric? So as a reminder, the Topo Research Grid basically says on outbound touches that it's going to take 24 touches on average, and it's going to rank basically down whenever the ACV goes up. If I had to guess why this is happening, is because people for enterprise, they're being more highly tailored, right? So they're saying like, oh, okay, enterprise, we really need to focus in. So it's taking them less touch points. It's taking them 20, 24, and then for ACV for 75 and 250K over, it's taking them less touch points. And if I had to guess why, it's because people start to research and people start to really care about who they're talking to. And so this is just as a background of like the amount of touches and durations that it's going to take. But if I had to guess why these numbers are how they are, it's because people say like SMB, it doesn't really matter. But again, approach is the exact same amount of time, and it's more effective if we do personalization. Also, as a reminder, the amount of dials per day were 35 via Topo Research. So the math with industry stats, if I'm looking at a personalization and strategy over call, then I would say personalization strategy plus relevance, the calls that I can make are 60. That is what my teams at minimum were making, which is going to yield on average 7 to 6.8 or 6.8 actual connections. Yikes, right? Folks, this is where some of our problem is that we're not getting enough connections. We're making the dials, but we're not getting enough connections. So 6.8 connections, let's say I have a conversion rate of 15% whenever I'm using personalization and relevance. So, 50, for math's sakes, I'm saying you can 3x the conversion ratio with personalization and relevance over relevance only. In my experience, you can 5x it, but I'm going to take 3x as the minimum bar. So if I have a 15% conversion for personalization and relevance, I have 7 connections per day based off of 60 dials that I made. I'm going to book 1.05 meetings off of personalization and relevance, regardless of what segment that I'm selling into. Relevance only, let's take the industry activity metric of what Topo gave me of reps are making 35 dials, which will yield 4 connections with a 5% conversion rate because it's much lower than my personalization strategy. That's going to give me 0.2. This is real data. This is real data of what I have done, seen with these teams, and what Topo is pushing out into, and they're correct. They looked at 200 companies within B2B SaaS alone, and this is real data of, I was doing 60 calls at minimum. They're saying average for activity metric is going to be 35, which was yielding 7 connections, 4 for the average activity, which is relevance only. And this is a give me here on conversion. I was actually anywhere from 4xing to 7xing my conversion when I pivoted from relevance only to personalization and relevance. But I said, you know what, folks, I'm going to take a 3x conversion. So it's 5% conversion for math's sake, 15% conversion for personalization and relevance. So I'm going to yield 1.05 meetings per day versus 0.2 meetings per day with the relevant strategy, regardless of how big the company is. Let's talk about email. Personalization and relevance, I was sending 35 emails, 9% conversion. Let's say it's only a 3x conversion, which email it really works well. That would yield me 3.15 meetings per day. Let's take the average activity metric for Topo and say 40 emails per day is average. At a 3% conversion, even though you are getting out a few more emails, at a 3% conversion versus a 9% conversion, which again, I cannot tell you how big of a difference there is between the example that I'm giving you and what I was actually seeing in real life, but let's just cut it down and let's give me the worst case scenario. I'm swinging with the smallest bat possible with this technique versus the real life bat being 5x of what I was actually swinging with. I'll give you 3x the conversion. This still yields with me, even if I cut my teams back to 35 emails per day, which we were sending over that. And, and I'm taking this industry average of 40 emails per day, which makes sense based on the experience I've had. I would still yield 3.15 meetings versus 1.2 meetings because my conversion was much higher because I knew who they were. So In this example, it's like 1.05 meetings per day via call versus 0.2 with relevance only, 3.15 over email versus 1.2 with relevance only. So the math is there for the industry stats to do personalization and relevance over just relevance only. But let's, for an instance, let's give me an even smaller bet. Let's say that the industry, let's throw Topo's research out the window. Let's say that all of a sudden the industry was matching my call metric. I'll even give you that. They are matching the amount of dials that my team was doing, and keep in mind that my team was doing at a minimum, they were actually doing in real life, but they were doing in a minimum with 60 calls per day. And Topo research yielded 35. So let's say for a second, though, that the exact same amount of dials. All of a sudden, the industry learned how to speed up relevance, okay? So let's go 60 and 60. So 60 would yield 7 connections, 6.8. For, rough conversion, I went to rounded up and went to 7. On 15% conversion, gives me 1.05 meetings. I'm going to give you that it's a matched amount of dials, even though that is a give me based on data, and that is not the reality. 7 connections would yield the exact same amount of connections, and it's 5% conversion versus 15, which again, this delta was much bigger for me, but I'm going to give you 3x only. You're still batting against me 1.05 versus 0.35. So relevance only is going to give me a third of a meeting per day, whereas personalization relevance is going to give me 1 meeting per day. Now let's go to email. I'm still sticking at 35. I'm going to say, I'm sending less emails than I was actually in real life. And I'll say I'm sending over 35 emails. And I'm only going to give myself a 3x conversion, which in all reality, it was somewhere around 6 or 7 in most cases. So I'm going to give you that it's a 3% conversion for relevance only, a 9% conversion for me, and that I was only sending 35 emails and that you were sending 40. 35 times 9 still gives me 3.15. 40 times 3% gives me 1.2. So even with all the variables against me, I'm still going to yield roughly 4.2 meetings with a personalization and relevance strategy, and I'm going to net roughly 1.55 meetings with relevant strategy only. So I hope that we have blown that one up. I'm getting red in the face because of how the math looks. I get that the theory is out there, but when you look at the data and you look at the actual approach, unless there's a limiting factor, which I will go into when you shouldn't personalize in this personalization point. So go to that session if you want to see the couple of examples whenever I wouldn't personalize, because there are some. Unless you are within one of those categories, you would have to be crazy not to start personalizing your messaging based on the math that not only I have seen with my teams, not only all the people who've deployed the approach have seen with their teams, but based on the data and critical thinking of you can send out more messages, you can make more dials based on a personalization strategy, and you can bump up the quality. All right, feeling good. Myth number 4 that we need to blow up. Myth number 4 is that you don't need to personalize, you should just do relevance. So the former myth, we went into the math of why you'd be nuts not to personalize, but there are some cases where I wouldn't personalize. If you want to hear more about these, if you go into the session, there's a session within Personalization Point, I believe it's episode 7 or 8, where I talk about there are some cases where I wouldn't personalize. I don't think they're going to be where you think. I'll give you one example to quote unquote tease you a little bit. If I'm selling B2C, I simply can't personalize. But to see the rest, I believe there's 10 in total. Go into that session, I go a little bit deeper. But what I want to focus on today is why people stick to relevance. People stick to relevance for the following 3 reasons of what I have heard. Number 1, they want to maintain consistency among their reps. So they want to say like, okay, I want to maintain consistency of what people are saying, because it really makes me uncomfortable if reps are saying stuff that I don't know what they're doing. And so that is one of the arguments for staying for relevance that I'm going to light up on the next slide. But that is one of the reasons that I've heard. Number 2 is people say they want to stick to relevance because they want to beta test out what's working well. Number 3, they say that they want to stick to relevance because they want to stay on brand. They need to make sure that they're brand consistent, within the brand guidelines for the, company that they're selling for, and they're scared that their reps, if they personalized, would go off brand. So these are the 3 reasons of why people I have heard stick to relevance. So number 1, for all the SDR leaders out there, for this maintain consistency piece, what ends up happening is SDR leaders have to end up writing all of these sequences for their SDRs that are not approved by marketing. So not only are they not necessarily staying on brand, what happens in execution is they're not going to the marketing team all case scenarios, or even most case scenarios, especially as you head down market and SMB and mid-market. They're not shipping over all of these sequences and basically saying, hey, marketing, is this okay to send out? For time's sake and brevity's sake, they're just writing them for their reps. Or number 2 case scenario, their reps are writing the sequences themselves. So not only we're not maintaining consistency, their reps are creating all of their own sequences for different buyer personas and saying different things. So now at the sake of quote unquote maintaining consistency, because we don't want them to write personalized emails, because then the SDR would be the writer, even within relevance, they end up being the writer. They start creating their own sequences and running amok. And then at one point they say like, okay, we need to maintain consistency. And so we need to, draw out some of these sequences that have been creative. But in both case scenarios, not only do they not approve it by marketing, but the SDR ends up being the writer anyway, because they write their own sequences because they want to have some level of control. So we are sacrificing all of the amazing effects of personalization, knowing our buyer, at the sake of making sure that everyone's consistent and the SDR doesn't just run all over the place. But what ends up happening is the SDR runs all over the place, but they just run all over the place using relevant messaging as opposed to personalized and relevant messaging. Number 2, another point that I would add to this mix is we haven't checked the data. Meaning, I want you to pause right here if you're an SDR leader. The myth was, do not go to your computer. The myth is that we wanted to beta test out which sequence was working and which message was working so we know, quote unquote, what to replicate. So if you're an SDR leader, I want you to not go to your computer. And if you can tell me the top 3 emails that have had the most conversion in terms of percentages into a booked meeting for the right title, then I would say you are 1 out of a million. So the thing that we were, again, trying to measure or trying to do relevance for was so we could beta test out what was working. But we're not actually checking the data on what's working. And even if we see that a template worked, we don't know why. We don't have causation data. Best case scenario, we beat up sales tech vendors to give us correlation data. But what we're after is the top 3 words that not correlate with success, but cause success. And we certainly, the sales tech vendors, we can't even do it. So it's like the end user certainly can't do it unless there's some kind of like Billy Bean, Peter DiPosito statistician from Yale with a team. Then they can't figure out, even if they are checking the data, why that, from a regression analysis perspective, caused conversion on my team. And let's say for a second that they did. Let's say for a second that they did go to Yale, or there's some data savant, etc., and they found out like, oh, okay, this sequence, this template, this caused the most conversion. What are they going to do about it? Because all they know is that it worked the best once. And if it's a relevance-only approach, they already blasted their TAM. So what are they going to blast them again with the exact same message and churn even more unsubscribes, etc., and gobble up some of that rapport? They can't use it. So it's like someone like, HubSpot is a great content marketer. Something works. They tell all their friends. HubSpot pushes an article. Everyone starts doing it, and then it doesn't work anymore. So let's say for an instance, let's say for the sake of it, that they did understand the data. They not only proved correlation, they not only looked at the data, they proved correlation in the data, but they proved causation. They still don't know what to do with it. They still don't know how to replicate, how to add that strategy into future templates. So we are flushing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, of I'm not getting all the positive effects of personalization because I want to quote unquote beta test out what works. And we are not even getting, I've yet to see a program that is getting any positive ramification from beta tests when it comes to SDRs. And I would say the other point I would throw in there is marketing is one to many. Marketing is one to many. Many people have come to me and they have asked me, can my SDR team be replaced by AI? And my response on stage at some points was how most of the teams that I have seen are running it. Yes. If you can send out multiple emails to the same person and all my SDR it needs to do is quote unquote push a button, then my argument back to that is why couldn't I just use Marketo to send out that email? Why do I need an SDR team to do relevant messaging? And the reality is that I don't. I need an SDR team for personalization. I need them to understand what personalized premise would hook back to our value prop and to use that creativity to really hook the buyer, to really understand who the buyer is. I need all of that wonderful cerebral calories to be focused on the right things. But from an automation perspective, if you are going to do a relevant strategy only, if you're just going to base on buyer persona and industry vertical, then why on earth would you need a human being to do that? Number three, even point number two, we haven't checked the data. Even if we have checked the data, we don't know what to do with it. And even if we did know what to do with it, I certainly have never seen a team that has built a strategy around it. And then the last point, I already covered it in my long self-righteous monologue ran earlier, but once it works, it doesn't work. Once it works, it doesn't work anymore because everyone starts doing it. Babe Ruth was not good because he had a good bat. Because the minute that he had that bat, so did everyone else in the industry. So it comes down to how he was swinging that bat. So once it works, if it's a little pill, guess what everyone else can do? They can swallow the little pill. And so all of a sudden, everyone can get the same result from something that was extremely low investment and extremely low skill. So once it works, it doesn't work. Next myth, you can't personalize to most buyers. I have heard this over and over and over. My buyer is not super active on LinkedIn. Let me stop right here. Personalization is tough, as all good things are. Personalization is tougher than just pushing a button. But we are at the point in the industry where our buyers want more and they deserve more. And so you're never going to find a buyer persona that is just writing articles about how they want your product. I would be shocked if they did. However, there are 5 buckets of personalization. I won't go into all of the details. If you want to know more, go to Personalization at Scale. But, self-authored content, engaged content. Let's say they're not active on LinkedIn. They're on LinkedIn. If they're on LinkedIn, they have self-identified traits, company line, profile line, headline. They have junk drawer premises. They put their schools that they went to. They put the people that they're following. Even if they're not posting, which is buckets 1 and 2, buckets 3, 4, and 5 by code are on LinkedIn. Their junk drawer, they have self-identified traits in their About Me section. And the last bucket is company level data. So if they are a part of a company and that company exists, that company will exist on LinkedIn. And you can go to their profile on LinkedIn, tease out a hook on the website, tease out a hook in the About section for the company where they're talking well about themselves, tease it out, hook it, stick the landing, get the meeting, cash money, go to the bank. So most buyers, even though it's tougher to personalize, of course it is, all good things come from some amount of effort. You can't lose weight through a pill. You just can't. It takes more criteria than that. And that's why it's so highly regarded when someone does something like that, because it's very, very complex. So personalization as defined, I just want people to have this as a background. These are the 5 buckets. Again, go to Personalization at Scale, but buckets 3 through 5 will automatically have if they are signed on to LinkedIn. Now, there are some cases where I'd say the buyer is simply not on LinkedIn. Now, that might be one of the places where you wouldn't personalize. Go to the session, I unpack it more. But for instance, I've heard like, okay, for farmers, I can't personalize to farmers. They're not on LinkedIn. Until I talked to a company 2 weeks ago who their ICP was farmers. And they said, actually, we used your approach and it 3x'd our numbers. So even farmers, it works for. So buckets 1 and 2, you're not gonna find someone who writes an article who says, please come sell me. Please come sell me. Here's a quote how to do it. But I would say buckets 1 and 2 can be your most lethal buckets if you can just put a little cerebral creativity into it and hook that personalization to relevance, which I cover in one of the other sections in Personalization Point. Myth number 6, if you're not personalizing, you're not focused on relevance. I have heard about me in specific, people in social, they're like, she's personalization girl. And I'm like, time out. She came from relevance. It's born and bred in the sales world where I've been trained on every single training methodology I think that exists on the planet. And so I came from relevance. So out of need and desperation to get my teams to produce, I, as a practitioner, had to do something different. This wasn't theory. This was, as a practitioner, I needed more numbers than relevance was yielding. So personalization does not mean that you're not being relevant. By code, you have to be relevant. In my 7 pillars, I cover relevance. I cover a whole session on how to hook personalization to relevance. I tell you not to do the 10-80-10 where you bring up that I love Taylor Swift and you don't hook it. So this theory that if you are personalized and you are not relevant, that you are by code not relevant, could not be more untrue. So you should always be thinking about your buyer personas, get to know them, what they care about, what pains, what are they metriced on, what's the lagging indicator of that metric, what's the leading indicator of that metric, and what's the variable, and then think through your buyer persona pitch. If I'm talking to a VP of sales, it's going to be a much different conversation than a VP of sales development. I've had people walk up to me at conferences and say, Becc, nice to meet you. What do you do? And my response verbatim is always, well, before I make the classic sales mistake of blasting you with all the wonderful, bells and whistles that we do and not think about how that's relevant to you, if you wouldn't mind me asking, can you tell me a little bit about your team? And I get them to start talking to me about what their role is, about what's going on with their team, because above all, I want to be relevant to them in that pitch. So when I quote unquote pitch them, when I'm trying to shoot that duck down, I'm using the right ammo. I'm using the right bullets because a VP of sales enablement versus a VP of sales care about much different things. Their day-to-day is very, very different. And so if you are personalizing, it certainly does not by code mean that you aren't relevant. And I argue if you aren't relevant, then you need to think about it. That's the only place that you should start from is how do I intertwine the two? So personalization as defined, like I said, is going to be anything that's one-to-one that you can't repeat. These are the 5 buckets. Relevance as defined is anything that can be one-to-many. So demographic, firmographic, technographic, segmenting people. This is how people usually sell, is this combined with another one-to-many premise of content download plus value prop on buyer persona. I noticed you downloaded this content. So like, hey, do you want to talk? Because we work with VPs of sales who X, Y, and Z. And then my finger cannot get to the delete button faster. So this is the relevant premises. You're predicated on hooking them together. And if you don't believe me, I would beg of you to believe this. Personalization Point, episode 1, I go into all of the 66 sequences and sales plays that you can run. Very long session, very, very nerdy. I have inbound, postbound, bridgebound, and cold outbound. Out of those 66 sequences, 65 of them have one-to-many premises involved that are automated based on relevance. There is only one play that I run that doesn't pre-coded have into it relevance. It's only one play, and that is where I'm hand-holding, saying before we even talk about personalization, know your buyer persona. Know your relevant buyer persona. So like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I am relevant. However, I would plead to understand the math that out of the 66 plays that I run, 65 of them have coded into it relevance. And only one do I handhold and instruct reps on how to do it, and I came from relevance. So out of the emails that I send, almost every sequence that I run is going to be a shell sequence. It is 16 steps over 21 days, 5 emails, 10 cold calls, and a LinkedIn research step. Out of those 5 emails, 3 out of those 5 emails have relevance hooked in mandatorily, coded into the actual email. 2 out of the 5 emails are a multi-thread email that are a multi-thread email and a breakup email, meaning these are emails that are in response to the email above. So every single email that I send out is either coded into it a spot for relevance where I instruct people on how to do it, and if not, then I do a multi-thread email, or it's a multi-thread email to the email where the relevance was hooked in. So that's myth 6. I'm getting heated, folks. If you've turned it off, I totally understand. And you're like, this girl is mad. I know in my blood that this strategy, firsthand and secondhand from all the results that I've seen in teams, really works. Really works. And I'm trying to get more people to see that and take the sting and the scare out of doing it, because I always want what's best for you. If you're watching this, I want what's best for you, and I want results for you, because if you're watching a video like this, you deserve it. You're hungry enough to watch something like this. So let's go into the last myth, and then we can close out. You can't measure play effectiveness. This is the last myth of personalization, that people say like, oh, if I don't send out just relevant templates, I essentially have no way to metric, what plays are working for me. Like, how will I know what to repeat? I feel like we blew up earlier that people don't measure it anyway, and they certainly can't do anything with the information. I would argue with personalization, you actually can measure it more. Instead of thinking, what are the 3 words that would cause conversion, I can understand from a high level, are content downloads more effective for me than webinar registrants? Or webinar registrants more effective in terms of conversion, results in ACV, and titles that I want, more effective than the common VC play? Or is the common VC play more effective than, competitors of my current clients? So if you do a personalization approach, incorporating, one-to-many messaging and one-to-one, yes, you can't hypothetically measure the exact words, because the exact words are going to be different. But there's no one who's doing that anyway. So in this format, you can understand what play overall is working better for my company. Is content downloads working more effectively? Is webinar registrants working more effectively? Is IPO working more effectively? Is hypergrowth working more effectively? What does the data say based on play? So now not only do I know what to do about it, if I can say, hey team, you need to start on the common VC play because that's working 3x better than the referral play. But you can also pipe back to marketing like, hey, I don't need 1 billion MQLs, just point blank. I don't need just quote unquote more pipeline based on the data that we've seen. I need 500 content downloads because it has this conversion metric and will give me this many meetings. I need 700 webinar registrants, because it'll give me this conversion metric with this many meetings, and I need X amount of virtual event attendees, this conversion metric, this amount of meetings, and I need X amount of website views. So when we hit our pipeline number, it is not by mistake. We know what the data is going to give us. So we give back to our wonderful marketing team, not just in generic, I need more, but an instruction map of these are the kind of MQLs that I need, and this is the resultant ROI. So we make it a true funnel, and we make it a true team, and we make it a true game that we can finally win again, because it's a science and we're not leaving 98% of it up to art. So in summary, I know that personalization takes more cerebral calories. It's a little bit more difficult. It takes more skill, but the results are there. And I feel like it is a wonderful opportunity for us to start pushing ourselves and thinking about the things that are working, and codify and look at the data of what are the true things that matter to my prospects in terms of their conversion and mattered to my team because of that. So I am excited if you have watched it so far. I'm excited if you even put your toe a little bit in the water and say, I'm going to try out this approach, and never ever take my word for it. Deploy the strategy, and where it's working, if a rep is doing relevant messaging only and they are far exceeding their goals, I always say, keep doing what you're doing. Number one time that you should not do a personalization strategy is if you're already getting your results from relevance. But I have a feeling, based on industry data, that 24% of SDRs are hitting quota and 76 aren't. And 85% of account executives are not hitting 75% of their quota because of the pipeline issue, that we are at a crossroads here. And so we need to do something about it and be very, very data-driven, check our ego at the door, and we can pivot the industry very quickly because we want more, we need more, and there's an opportunity with the door in front of us. So that is everything for this session. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. If you like this session, you want to hear more, be sure to go to the website at flipthescript.co, and I cover a bunch of different sessions. And if you really love this session, if you go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn, give us a follow and shout out me and your top 2 takeaways so I know what you want to hear more of. And either way, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Watch out.